Awesome. So I'm Bassam. I'm the one of the creators of the Crossplane project, and I'm also the CEO and founder of Upbound. Really excited to have everyone here on our first Crossplane Community Day. We're trying this event out. We're trying to bring the community together, and really glad that we have such a great attendance and popular event and fantastic speakers. Thank you, Kelsey, for actually walking through Crossplane maybe in a better way than we've done yet to date. So um, I thought what I would do is essentially walk through some of the motivation that led to creating the Crossplane project and kind of what we're seeing in the enterprise and what we're seeing in the open source community that kind of led us to where we are right now. It might set a good backdrop for for the rest of the talks today, and maybe when we open up for QA, it'll give you a bit more context. So I want to start by looking at this what we're calling the enterprise platform. So if you think about a typical enterprise, they're typically dealing with different kinds of infrastructure. So that's the pieces on the right, whether it's cloud infrastructure, things like AWS or Azure or Alibaba Cloud, or if it's infrastructure as an on-premise infrastructure, whether it's their Cloud Foundry or their OpenShift or VMware clusters, or their own kind of internal Kubernetes clusters, right? Or things like boutique clouds, whether they're using MongoDB or Elastic or Redis Cloud or all of those things. Typically, a typical enterprise is dealing with a ton of heterogeneity. They're trying to essentially put together all this infrastructure in a way that their application teams can consume, right? And if you think about the application teams and what they're trying to do, they're trying to get their applications out into production. While some companies let application teams access infrastructure directly, it's typically an anti-pattern. Specifically, whether it's they don't have the skill set to do infrastructure or meet the compliance or security standards that the enterprise has, or it's just for cost control. If you let people go wild on cloud infrastructure, that definitely runs up the bill. And so what we typically see happen is folks end up creating what looks like an intermediate platform, right? A place where they can set configuration, pre-canned configuration for what they want to use in the cloud. And then a place where they can actually expose a set of abstractions that hide away the details of the infrastructure and give something that's actually more consumable to their application developers. It's also a place where they capture policy and then try to automate a bunch of the work that they're doing within the team. And so this internal platform, varies in different companies, but we see typically it's managed by, platform teams. They can have different names, whether it's DevOps or SRE teams, or even in larger companies, they can tend to specialize around networking and security and others, right? But the end goal is the same. How do we get applications as quickly as possible while still meeting the standards around compliance and security and policy into production, into the infrastructure, running on the infrastructure? And how do you do so by reducing costs, both in terms of cost of building such a platform, as well as the cost of maintaining it going forward? And so one of the things that we see as a challenge is how do you define the entry point to this platform? So let me unpack that a little bit. Specifically, how do these app teams consume this platform? In some companies, they open up tickets, right? There's a ticketing system. If you want to provision an infrastructure, you open a ticket, somebody handles the ticket, and you get some credentials set up for you that you can consume, and a connection that you can consume. Scripting is also popular. Some people actually, believe it or not, still run scripts. Infrastructure as code is another popular approach where you're essentially, the entry point becomes a Terraform apply, or maybe it's a CloudFormation script. And then pipelines, where you essentially have CI/CD pipelines, or GitOps is the more modern term for it, where you're putting, the application teams are putting stuff in source code repositories, and then pipelines are picking them up and running them into production. But what we consistently see is that while the approaches vary. There isn't a single place where people are capturing this configuration, this policy, and the automation. There tends to be multiple entry points into the platform. And when you have multiple entry points, it's hard to enforce policy. It's hard to capture consistent configuration. It's hard to get to the level of automation that you need. And so when we looked at how the cloud providers are running their platforms, arguably one of the largest platforms in the world are run by the cloud providers themselves, right? You can think of a cloud provider as a very large enterprise with a very large DevOps team running internally, managing hundreds of services on tens of regions around the world, right? And what they do is they centralize around a control plane. And the control plane essentially is the single point of entry into their platform. It is the thing that serves the API, a very consistent API to their entire service. Everything that's offered by their platform is exposed through this API. And they do that because it enables them to hide all the complexity, all the infrastructure, all the automation that they have internally behind an API line. It's also the place where they handle automation and lifecycle management, where they enforce policy, whether it's IAM policy or it's quotas or cost controls. Everything happens around this control plane. Metering and billing and chargeback and all sorts of billing related policy is also handled around the control plane. And it's also the central point for monitoring and logging. All events that happen around the control plane. So this is how the cloud providers build their platforms. And Kelsey was making this point earlier, it also enables, by converging on an API, by using that as the entry point to your platform, it opens it up for many different ways of consuming the platform, whether it's consoles or CLI tools or pipelines or infrastructure as code, or even other complete platforms can be layered on top of this, right? The API as the convergence layer for platforms actually enables many different scenarios. If you were to put all of this in a tool or something else, then you don't get the same level of integration. You don't get the same level of ubiquity that you get with an API. So that led us to essentially asking the question, why doesn't the enterprise follow a similar approach? Can we bring essentially this control plane centric architecture to the enterprise and to the open source community at large? And so we started the Crossplane project essentially with that in mind. We launched it in December of 2018. It's an open source project. It follows an open governance model. We started with the Kubernetes control plane, as you saw with Kelsey's demo. We didn't want to rebuild a ton of the great work that has happened already in Kubernetes. If you think about it, Kubernetes is a control plane that came out of Google's Borg, which is the control plane running Google infrastructure. And so it's in some ways, supportive of what I was just talking about in terms of cloud platforms centralizing on control planes. Well, Kubernetes that is the origin of Kubernetes itself. And so we started, by essentially building all this machinery on top of the Kubernetes control plane. The extensibility point of CRDs and controllers was kind of enabled all of this. But what Crossplane lets you do is essentially declaratively configure and manage infrastructure and services. It allows you to abstract them, so you can publish your own well-defined API on top of your own infrastructure. And then deploy it using application models like OHM or even raw Kubernetes manifests. And because it's an active control plane, you're able to host controllers and your own automation on the control plane itself. So you can automate a ton of the toil that are typically done within the enterprise. And because it's a single entry point to your platform, it is the single point of enforcement for policy. And we'll see today when the folks from the open policy agents show you kind of how to use that with Crossplane, we think this is a great fit. And so what this enables is that you could essentially transform your infrastructure, the things that you've built, all the scripting and all the tooling and everything that you've done within your enterprise platform, expose it all through a single entry point of a control plane, your own API. You can layer your console, your CLI, your tools, your pipelines on top of that, just as we saw in Kelsey's demo. And then that API line becomes the entry point into your platform, where you can capture your configuration, your abstraction, your policy, and promote a high level of automation. So that's essentially the high level overview of Crossplane. That's what got us excited about this project. And it's a powerful project. We hope that you guys get to use it and try it and give us feedback about it. But it's also going to take a village to get it to the level that it needs to get to. And so today I'm happy to announce that we are actually donating the project to the CNCF. This is an effort on our part to make the project even a healthier open source project, and follows a stronger governance model, which we just updated. We're working with a number of folks in the ecosystem, including the folks over at GitLab and Red Hat and Microsoft and Alibaba Cloud and numerous other folks that are helping with Crossplane, and obviously the community at large. So it is going to take a village, and I encourage all of you to kind of help us and help the Crossplane community to kind of get to the point where it becomes the de facto control plane for the enterprise. Separately, we've realized that every open source project requires essentially at least a few companies around it, commercial companies that kind of help it succeed. So I'm happy to announce that Upbound is actually today opening up a public preview of Upbound Cloud. It is the first commercial offering of Crossplane. By far the easiest way to get going with Crossplane today. It will be generally available this year, but we're opening up a public preview because we want to get everybody involved and give us feedback about this. You can go to https://upbound.io, create an account, and get started today. Phil from the Upbound team will do a demo later on today. If you're hang around and see that, it's a really, really cool product. We're so excited to actually be announcing it today.